Right. So someone dug through a stack of old British recipe cards from the 1960s, handed them to a food scientist, and the scientist said, and I quote, "Why did we ever stop doing this?" That's the exact moment this video was born. Because it turns out your grandmother's generation was doing things in the kitchen that health officials, modernist chefs, and food safety boards actively told people to stop doing. They called these methods outdated, dangerous, even reckless. But now, decades later, the science has caught up and the verdict is coming back in favor of the old ways. We're counting down 25 of the most forbidden British cooking tricks from the 1960s that scientists are now saying were absolutely genius. And yes, every single one of these applies to your kitchen, whether you're cooking in Birmingham or Baltimore. Let's go. Number 25. Rubbing raw meat with dry mustard powder before roasting. In the 1960s, British housewives kept a tin of Coleman's mustard powder on the counter, specifically for rubbing onto beef and pork joints before they went into the oven. Health officials later discouraged this because they worried about people handling raw meat with spice mixes and cross-contaminating surfaces. So the practice quietly died. Here's why it was genius. Mustard powder contains allyl isothiocyanate, which is a natural antimicrobial compound. When you rub it into raw meat before cooking, it actively suppresses bacterial growth on the surface during the period between prep and oven entry. To use this today, mix 1 tablespoon of dry mustard powder with half a teaspoon of salt and a pinch of black pepper. Rub it firmly into every surface of your joint, then let it sit uncovered in the fridge for 30 minutes before roasting. The crust it produces is extraordinary. Number 24. Saving and reusing dripping. Every British kitchen in the 1960s had a dripping pot. After roasting beef or pork, the solidified fat was poured into a ceramic jar, kept on a cool pantry shelf, and reused for frying bread, roasting potatoes, and sautéing vegetables. The government's shift toward polyunsaturated vegetable oils in the 1970s made dripping look like a heart attack in a jar. It was practically banned from respectable cooking. But now we know that beef dripping and lard are rich in monounsaturated fats and have extremely high smoke points, meaning they're actually more stable under high heat than most vegetable oils. To revive this trick, after your next beef roast, pour the pan juices into a glass jar. The fat will rise and solidify on top. Scoop that solidified fat out and use a tablespoon of it to roast your potatoes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. You will never go back. Number 23. Soaking vegetables in salted water before cooking. British cooks in the 1960s routinely soaked their cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and broccoli in heavily salted cold water for up to 20 minutes before cooking. This was dismissed as unnecessary by modern food guides that said you should just wash your veg quickly and cook it fresh. The practice was largely abandoned. The science shows this actually does 2 things. First, it draws out any insects or dirt lodged in the leaves in a way that a quick rinse never achieves. Second, the salt begins a mild osmotic process that actually helps the vegetable retain its structural integrity and color during cooking. Soak your brassicas in a bowl of cold water with 2 teaspoons of salt for 15 minutes. Drain, rinse, and cook as normal. Your greens will be brighter and firmer. Number 22. Adding a splash of vinegar to poaching water. This one got buried under the idea that vinegar ruins the delicate flavor of eggs. British breakfast cooks in the 1960s added malt vinegar directly to their poaching water without hesitation. Food writers in later decades said it was unnecessary and potentially off-putting. The science is simple and confirmed. Acidity causes egg whites to coagulate faster and more tightly, which means fewer wispy strands and a neater, more compact poached egg. Add 1 tablespoon of white or malt vinegar to a pan of barely simmering water. Crack your egg into a small cup first, stir the water gently to create a slow vortex, and lower the egg in. 3 minutes gives you a perfectly set white with a liquid yolk. Number 21. Resting bread dough in a slightly warm oven. Before the age of proofing drawers and heated warming mats, British bakers in the 1960s would turn their gas oven on for just 2 minutes, switch it off completely, then place their covered dough inside to rise. Modern bakers were told this created uneven heat and inconsistent results. It sounds crude, but it's actually one of the most controlled proofing environments you can create at home. A briefly warmed oven stays between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which is ideal yeast territory. The confined space prevents drafts and maintains humidity. Try it once, and you'll see your dough double in about 45 minutes rather than an hour and a half. Number 20. Cooking bacon in cold water first. This sounds completely wrong, but 1960s British cooks would place their bacon rashers into a cold skillet, add a small splash of water, and only then turn on the heat. The idea was officially mocked as inefficient and soggy. But here's what the water actually does. It renders the fat slowly and evenly before the pan gets hot enough to cause burning. By the time the water evaporates, the fat is already flowing freely, and the bacon crisps up perfectly without shriveled edges or burnt spots. Try it with 4 rashers in a cold pan, add 3 tablespoons of water, heat on medium, and watch what happens. The difference is remarkable. Number 19. Using stale bread for stuffing without toasting it first. Stale bread was not wasted in 1960s Britain. It was the foundation of stuffing, and cooks would use bread that was 2 or 3 days old, completely without toasting. Modern recipes always call for lightly toasted bread to prevent sogginess. Here's the thing. Properly stale bread has already lost the right amount of moisture through natural air drying, which means it absorbs stock and fat more evenly and creates a stuffing with a more cohesive, satisfying texture. Day-old toasted bread absorbs stock too fast on the outside and stays dry in the center. Natural stale bread hydrates evenly. Leave your bread uncovered on a rack for 2 full days, then proceed with your stuffing recipe. Number 18. Blanching onions in boiling water before frying. Before sautéing their onions for pies, soups, or stews, many British cooks would briefly plunge them in boiling water for 60 seconds, then shock them in cold water. Later, cooks called this redundant and said it leached flavor. It does the opposite. Blanching deactivates an enzyme called inalliinase, which is responsible for the sulfurous harshness in raw onions. When you then fry the blanched onion, you get sweetness and depth much faster, cutting your sautéing time nearly in half. Blanch your diced onions for 60 seconds, drain, pat dry, and fry. You'll be amazed how quickly they turn golden without burning. Number 17. Keeping a block of salt on the counter for cooking. Coarse block salt was standard in British kitchens throughout the 1960s. Cooks would scrape flakes off as needed. This was later replaced by the push toward iodous table salt. Public health bodies discouraged unrefined salts for a time. Block salt and coarse sea salt contain trace minerals including magnesium and calcium that affect how salt interacts with food at a molecular level. These minerals slow the penetration of sodium into meat, giving a more even cure and seasoning. Scraping your salt from a block or using coarse flaked salt rather than fine table salt produces noticeably more balanced seasoning in everything from roasts to sauces. Number 16. Slow cooking porridge overnight on the lowest possible heat. Scottish and Northern English households in the 1960s would set their porridge on the absolute lowest gas flame before bed and let it cook overnight, a technique sometimes called overnight oats before overnight oats was a thing. Health officials worried about leaving gas appliances unattended, but the science of slow-cooked oats is remarkable. Extended low heat completely breaks down the phytic acid in oats that actually blocks mineral absorption. The result is porridge that is silkier, more digestible, and nutritionally superior to quick-cooked oats. If you have a slow cooker, set old-fashioned rolled oats in water at a ratio of 1:4 on the low setting before bed. Wake up to something extraordinary. Number 15. Wrapping leftover cheese in a damp cloth. British households in the 1960s stored their leftover cheddar and Lancashire cheese wrapped in a damp muslin cloth in a cool larder. Plastic wrap came along and was sold as the modern solution. Plastic actually traps ammonia gases released by cheese, accelerating spoilage and creating bitterness. A slightly damp cloth allows the cheese to breathe while maintaining just enough humidity to prevent the surface from drying and cracking. Wrap your hard cheese in a damp piece of kitchen cloth or cheesecloth. Place it in the least cold part of your fridge, and it will keep significantly longer and taste better throughout. Number 14. Adding a raw potato to oversalted soup or stew. This was a 1960s British kitchen staple. Drop in a peeled raw potato. Let the soup simmer for 20 minutes. Fish the potato out, and the soup would taste less salty. Food scientists eventually said this was a myth. Then they tested it more carefully. A raw potato does absorb sodium during cooking, and while it doesn't perform miracles, It measurably reduces saltiness when a dish is only moderately oversalted. It works particularly well in thick stews and bean soups. Use a medium potato, peeled and halved, simmered for at least 20 minutes in your oversalted pot, then removed entirely before serving. Number 13. Using the water from boiled potatoes to make gravy. After boiling potatoes, British cooks in the 1960s never poured that starchy water down the drain. They added it directly to the roasting pan alongside the drippings to build their gravy. Later generations called this an old wives' shortcut and said proper stock was the only acceptable base. Potato water is rich in resistant starch, which acts as a natural thickener and gives gravy a silky body without the need for cornstarch or flour roux. The starch also helps emulsify the fat from the drippings for a more cohesive sauce. Use about half a cup of reserved potato water per serving of gravy and add it to your hot roasting pan while scraping up all the browned bits. Number 12. Scoring sausages before cooking. British butchers throughout the 1960s would score their sausages with a sharp knife before they went into the pan or under the grill. This practice was later condemned by food authorities who said cutting the skin allowed fat to escape, drying out the sausage. Here's the real story. Scoring allows steam to vent gradually as the sausage heats, preventing the explosive burst that sends a sausage splitting down the side and losing half its fat in a single surge. Controlled scoring actually keeps more fat inside for longer, resulting in a juicier sausage with a more evenly browned exterior. Score 2 shallow diagonal cuts on each sausage before cooking over medium heat. Number 11. Making custard with just egg yolks, no cornstarch. The traditional British 1960s poured custard was made purely from egg yolks, sugar, and whole milk or cream, with heat control as the only thickener. The addition of cornstarch became standard partly because it's foolproof and doesn't curdle. Pure egg yolk custard was quietly abandoned for safety in domestic cooking, but the flavour and texture of a pure yolk custard are dramatically superior. The proteins in egg yolks, primarily phosphatan and livetin, create a silkier gel than starch can achieve. You need patience and a thermometer. Keep your custard below 180 degrees Fahrenheit while stirring constantly and you will never curdle it. The result is a poured custard that has a richness no store-bought version can match. Number 10. Leaving roast meat uncovered in the fridge overnight before cooking. British housewives in the 1960s would prep their Sunday joint on Saturday night, rub it with seasoning, and leave it sitting uncovered in the larder or later the fridge. Modern food safety messaging pushed back hard on uncovered raw meat in fridges due to contamination fears. But uncovered refrigerated meat undergoes a process called pellicle formation. The surface dries slightly, concentrating flavor compounds and creating a tacky surface that actually allows crusts and rubs to adhere far more effectively during roasting. The slightly drier surface also reaches higher surface temperatures faster in the oven, producing better browning reactions. Number 9. Washing rice until the water runs clear. In British households cooking rice throughout the 1960s, every cook knew you rinsed rice in multiple changes of cold water until the water stopped being cloudy. The rise of parboiled and instant rice products made this practice seem old-fashioned and unnecessary. Excess surface starch on rice creates a gummy, clumped texture when cooked. Rinsing removes this surface starch so each grain can cook independently and absorb liquid without sticking to its neighbours. Number 8. Cooking vegetables in the water used to rinse meat. Some 1960s British cooks would rinse their raw chicken and then use that same water to parboil root vegetables that were destined for a long roast alongside the meat. This practice was categorically banned by food safety authorities, and rightly so in terms of cross-contamination risks for direct consumption. However, the science behind why the broth from cooking meat and vegetables together creates superior flavor is well established. The modern, safe version of this trick is to instead use the pan juices from your resting meat poured over your vegetables before the final 15 minutes of roasting. You get the flavor marriage they were going for without any safety compromise. Number 7. Using lemon juice instead of cream of tartar for meringue. British bakers in the 1960s who ran out of cream of tartar would squeeze fresh lemon juice into their egg whites. This was considered imprecise and unreliable by later pastry guides. Both lemon juice and cream of tartar are acids. Acid stabilizes the protein network that forms when you whip egg whites, preventing them from collapsing. Lemon juice contains citric acid rather than tartaric acid, but it performs the same structural function. Use half a teaspoon of fresh lemon juice per 2 egg whites in place of cream of tartar. Your meringue will be just as stable and will hold its shape through baking without weeping. Number 6. Pan frying fish, skin, side down with a heavy weight on top. British fish and chip shop cooks in the 1960s pressed their fish portions skin side down in hot fat with a flat iron weight on top. Modern non-stick pan guidelines discouraged placing heavy objects on cookware. The weight achieves complete and even contact between the fish skin and the hot pan surface. Press your fish fillet skin side down with a flat spatula or a heavy pan lid for the first 2 minutes of cooking. You get perfectly crisp skin across the entire fillet surface. Number 5. Adding sugar to tomato-based sauces and soups. British cooks throughout the 1960s automatically added a pinch of sugar to any tomato soup or tomato sauce. Later cooking guides called this unsophisticated and unnecessary. Tomatoes are naturally high in glutamic acid, which creates their savouriness, but they also have high acidity. At the quantities used, around a quarter teaspoon per cup of tomatoes, sugar suppresses the perception of bitterness caused by oxidized phenolic compounds in cooked tomatoes. The result is a more rounded, complex tomato flavor. Try it in your next pasta sauce and notice how much more balanced the flavor becomes without tasting sweet. Number 4. Letting jam sit overnight before potting. Making jam in the 1960s was a 2-day affair for serious British preservers. After reaching setting point, they would allow the jam to sit covered in the pan overnight before ladling it into sterilized jars. Modern fast jam making guides said this was a food safety risk. Extended rest time at lower temperatures allows pectin networks to fully develop and distribute evenly through the jam, giving you a more consistent set throughout the jar rather than a layer of stiff gel at the bottom and runny syrup at the top. The temperature it rests at, around room temperature, is not warm enough to allow significant bacterial growth in a high sugar preserve. Cover your jam and let it rest before potting. Number 3. Double frying chips. This is the famous secret behind proper British chip shop chips from the 1960s. First fry at a lower temperature around 300 degrees Fahrenheit to cook the potato through entirely. Then rest them. Then fry again at a much higher temperature, around 375 degrees Fahrenheit, for the crisp exterior. The second fry dehydrates the outer starch layer at high heat, creating an impermeable, shattering crust that seals in the fluffy interior. This is the only way to make a chip that is simultaneously crispy outside and soft inside. No shortcut achieves it. Number 2. Using a wooden spoon that's never been washed with soap. This is the one that sounds the most outrageous, but hold on. Many 1960s British home cooks had a wooden spoon reserved exclusively for certain sauces, particularly their bechamel or bread sauce, and they would rinse it in hot water only, never soap. Health campaigns in the 1970s rightfully pushed for better kitchen hygiene. But here's what the science found later. Wooden utensils that develop a thin, seasoned layer from regular hot water rinsing and heat exposure develop antimicrobial properties in the wood's porous structure. The wooden spoon for your bechamel is not a hygiene disaster if it's hot water rinsed and allowed to dry completely between uses in a well-ventilated kitchen. Scientists found bacteria could not be recovered from wooden surfaces treated this way. Number 1. Hanging meat without refrigeration in a cool, ventilated space. Dry aging at home. In the 1960s, butchers and households across Britain would hang their beef, lamb, or game in a cool larder or outhouse for days or even weeks. Health authorities in the latter half of the 20th century effectively banned this for domestic practice as refrigeration became universal and cross-contamination fears grew. But now it's back. Properly hung meat undergoes enzymatic breakdown of muscle tissue, where naturally occurring enzymes called calpains and cathepsins break down tough connective protein. The result is dramatically more tender, deeply flavored meat. Modern dry aging is simply the scientific confirmation of what every 1960s British butcher already knew. If you have a consistent cool space that stays between 34 and 38 degrees Fahrenheit with airflow, you can safely dry age beef on the bone for 3 to 7 days. The transformation in flavor is nothing short of astonishing. Before you dismiss the old ways next time you're in the kitchen, remember that sometimes the people who came before us got things exactly right. If you found one of these tricks genuinely useful, drop a comment below telling me which one you're trying first. And if you want more forgotten food wisdom that science is finally catching up to, the next video is already waiting for you.